Be me Betty, 52 years old, HR director at major tech corporation downtown, pulling in $180,000 annually plus bonuses, living in gorgeous 2-bedroom luxury apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, driving my brand new leased Mercedes C-Class that I just picked up last month. Life is perfect because I've spent the last 8 years building something beautiful. Started as senior HR manager back in 2016. Immediately saw how backwards this company was. Boardroom full of old white men making decisions. Engineering teams dominated by bros who thought they were so clever. Marketing department run by women who just smiled and nodded instead of fighting for real change. Knew I had to do something about it. Spent months researching and drafting comprehensive DEI framework. Not just some token diversity initiative like other companies. Real systemic change with teeth. Mandatory unconscious bias training for all employees. Diversity quotas for every department and promotion cycle. Anonymous reporting system for microaggressions and exclusionary behavior. Regular salary audits to identify and correct pay gaps. Cultural competency assessments tied to performance reviews. Presented to executive team with slides full of data about inclusion driving innovation. CEO actually listened because he was worried about negative press. Board approved my proposal unanimously. Got promoted to director 6 months later with full authority to implement everything. Those first few years were incredible. Finally had real power to create meaningful change. Established employee resource groups for every marginalized identity. Implemented inclusive hiring practices that looked beyond culture fit. Created safe spaces where people could share experiences without judgment. Developed mentorship programs connecting senior employees with underrepresented talent. But some people just couldn't adapt to progress. Had to let go of several managers who kept making innocent mistakes, like Robert from sales who kept calling our Latina VP spicy during meetings, or Jennifer from accounting who insisted on throwing Christmas parties despite our new inclusive holiday celebrations. Documented everything meticulously because I knew they'd try to fight back. My apartment became the perfect entertaining space for like-minded colleagues. Hosted monthly gatherings where we could discuss real issues affecting our workplace. Everyone always complimented my taste in art and wine selection. Felt so good to be surrounded by people who understood the importance of the work we were doing. Mercedes dealership knew me by name because I'd been dreaming of that car for years. Test drove it 3 times before finally signing the lease. Metallic silver with premium interior package. Driving through downtown in that car while listening to NPR felt like everything was falling into place. By 2020, our company was featured in Diversity, magazines as a model workplace. Invited to speak at conferences about creating inclusive corporate culture. Other HR leaders reached out asking for advice about implementation strategies. Felt proud knowing we were setting an example for entire industry. But then something shifted around 2022. New generation of employees started questioning everything. Not just questioning old systems, but questioning my systems too. Like Marcus from product development, who suggested our mentorship program was performative. Or Priya from marketing, who claimed our resource groups were creating reverse segregation. Tried explaining that change takes time and we'd made incredible progress, but they kept pushing for more radical approaches, wanted to eliminate performance reviews entirely because they reflected systemic bias. Suggested rotating leadership roles regardless of experience or qualifications, demanded representation on executive committee despite being entry-level employees, started noticing they'd whisper when I walked by their desks. Caught them rolling their eyes during my presentations about microaggressions. One of them actually asked if I'd considered stepping back to make room for fresh perspectives. Had to document these interactions because their behavior was becoming disrespectful. Then Maya, from engineering, started questioning my decision-making during team meetings, pointing out that most of my direct reports were around my age, suggesting that our diversity initiatives weren't reaching younger employees, implying that I wasn't practicing what I preached about inclusive leadership. Tried mentoring her about professional communication and hierarchy, explained how important it was to respect institutional knowledge, but she kept pushing boundaries and encouraging others to do the same. Social media became increasingly hostile environment. Younger employees posting cryptic messages about outdated approaches to equity, seeing my policies discussed in group chats that I wasn't included in. Friends from other companies started asking if I'd seen certain posts about our workplace. Everything came crashing down on a Tuesday in March. Got called into emergency meeting with CEO and board members. They had received formal complaint filed through our anonymous reporting system. Multiple employees had submitted detailed documentation about my exclusionary practices. Complaint accused me of creating hostile work environment for younger employees, claimed I was gatekeeping progressive change and centering my own voice over marginalized perspectives. Said my hiring practices favored people who shared my specific generational worldview. Alleged that I had weaponized DEI language to suppress legitimate workplace concerns. Couldn't believe what I was hearing. These were the exact same policies I'd fought so hard to establish. Everything I'd done was designed to create more equitable workplace. Tried explaining my track record and all the positive changes we'd implemented, but they had screenshots of internal messages where I'd expressed frustration with younger employees. They had documented instances where I'd interrupted people during meetings. They had survey responses showing that junior staff felt intimidated by my feedback style. Somehow, they'd turned my passion for justice into evidence of oppressive behavior. CEOs said they needed to take immediate action to restore trust in leadership. Effective immediately, I was being placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Had to clean out my office while security watched. 8 years of building something meaningful reduced to cardboard boxes. Investigation lasted 2 weeks, but outcome felt predetermined. Younger employees testified about feeling silenced and marginalized by my leadership style. They described my mentorship as condescending and my feedback as invalidating. Claimed I'd created culture where dissent was punished and conformity was rewarded. Final report concluded that my approach to DEI had become institutionally oppressive. Recommended transitioning to new leadership that better reflects our evolving values. Offered severance package contingent on signing non-disclosure agreement. Had to choose between fighting legally or accepting termination quietly. Signed the papers because legal battle would have been too expensive. Used severance to cover lease termination fees on apartment and car. Landlord was understanding but still charged penalties for breaking lease early. Mercedes dealership was less sympathetic about returning car before lease expired. Watching movers pack up my beautiful apartment was devastating. All those evenings hosting colleagues who believed in same values. Artwork and furniture that reflected my sophisticated taste. View of city skyline that reminded me daily of how far I'd come. Social media explosion happened within hours of news breaking. Former employees posting celebration messages about toxic leadership being removed. Screenshots of my old presentations being mocked for performative activism. LinkedIn posts from industry contacts distancing themselves from my approaches. Tried posting my own response explaining the situation. But comments section filled with criticism from people I'd considered allies. Colleagues who'd praised my work publicly started questioning my methods privately. Felt like entire professional network evaporated overnight. Friends from my building stopped inviting me to weekend gatherings. Book club members said they needed space to process recent events. Yoga instructor who'd always complimented my dedication suddenly had no spots available. Realized how much of my social life had been connected to professional status. Bank account drained quickly despite careful budgeting. Severance package covered essentials, but not lifestyle I'd grown accustomed to. Had to sell furniture and jewelry just to pay credit card bills. Downtown. Luxury became unaffordable reality very quickly. Only option was moving back to hometown where my sister still lived. Same small town I'd left 25 years ago to build better life. Population 12,000 where everyone knew everyone's business. Exact opposite of anonymous city life I'd grown to love. Sister let me stay in her guest room while I figured out next steps. First week back felt like traveling backwards in time. Same grocery store with same cashiers who remembered me from high school. Same coffee shop where I used to study for college entrance exams. Worse than anonymity was recognition. People remembered how I'd talked about my important career during holiday visits. How I'd explained why small-town thinking was holding back progress. How I'd suggested they needed more exposure to diverse perspectives. Ran into high school classmate at library who asked about my fancy corporate job. Had to explain that I was transitioning between opportunities. Could see in her eyes that she knew something had gone wrong. Felt humiliating to be back where I'd started after achieving so much. Applied for HR positions at local businesses, but market was limited. Regional hospital had opening, but salary was third of what I'd been making. Manufacturing plant needed compliance officer, but work felt like huge step backwards. Nothing available that utilized years of experience building inclusive workplaces. Started freelance consulting to pay bills. Marketed services to small businesses wanting to improve diversity practices. But local companies weren't interested in comprehensive DEI transformation. Most just wanted basic harassment prevention training to meet legal requirements. Spent hours analyzing what had gone wrong with my career. Reviewed every policy I'd created and every decision I'd made. Couldn't identify anything that hadn't been based on sound research and good intentions. Everything I'd done was designed to create more equitable workplace for everyone. Real problem was generational divide that I hadn't anticipated. Younger employees wanted change to happen faster and more dramatically. They didn't appreciate careful, systematic approach that respected existing structures. Their impatience had blinded them to progress that was already being made. Started seeing patterns in how older women leaders were being pushed out across industries. Read articles about cancel culture targeting people who'd dedicated careers to social justice. Realized I wasn't alone in experiencing backlash from same people I'd tried to help. Systemic oppression was working against me just like it worked against other marginalized groups. Age discrimination was clearly a factor in how I'd been treated. Younger employees felt threatened by my experience and institutional knowledge. They used DEI language as weapon to remove someone who represented different generation. Ironic that tools designed to protect marginalized people were used to marginalize me. Gender probably played role too, since assertive women leaders face different standards. Same behavior that would be praised in male executives was criticized as aggressive in me. Double bind of needing to be strong enough to create change, but not so strong as to threaten others. Classic example of how patriarchal structures operate even in supposedly progressive environments. Kept detailed journal documenting my experience for potential book or article. Story needed to be told about how DEI initiatives could be corrupted by bad actors. Younger generations' impatience was undermining decades of careful progress. Someone needed to warn other leaders about weaponization of equity language. Sister tried being supportive, but didn't really understand complexity of situation. Suggested maybe I'd been too focused on work, and this was chance for better work-life balance. But she'd never experienced satisfaction of creating systemic change in major corporation. Couldn't comprehend what it felt like to lose purpose along with position and prestige. Hometown gossip mill gradually learned details about why I'd returned. Story got distorted through multiple retellings until facts became unrecognizable. People who'd never worked in corporate environment making judgments about situation felt frustrated by small-town mentality that couldn't grasp nuances of workplace politics. Month 3 of unemployment brought financial reality into sharp focus. Had to apply for state health insurance after losing corporate benefits. Started shopping at discount grocery stores instead of organic markets. Cancelled subscription services and memberships that had been automatic expenses. Interview at county government office for diversity coordinator position. Salary was embarrassingly low, but beggars couldn't be choosers. Interviewer was younger than my nephew and clearly intimidated by my resume. Asked questions that showed she didn't understand difference between compliance and transformation. Didn't get the job because they wanted someone who could relate to younger demographics. Another example of age discrimination disguised as practical hiring decision. My qualifications were superior, but apparently experience was liability rather than asset. System was rigged against people like me from multiple angles. Started attending local Democratic Party meetings to stay connected with progressive politics. But even there encountered resistance from younger activists who questioned my approaches. They wanted immediate radical change rather than incremental policy improvements, seemed more interested in protest than actual governance and implementation. Facebook posts about my situation attracted sympathy from other women my age, shared stories about similar experiences in different industries and organizations. Pattern was clear that older women leaders were being systematically pushed out. Created informal support network of professional women facing age-related discrimination. 6 months in, started teaching workplace diversity workshops at community college. Pay was minimal, but kept my skills sharp and provided some professional validation. Students were a mix of older workers seeking advancement and younger people entering workforce. Enjoyed sharing knowledge even if platform was much smaller than I was used to. Some students appreciated historical context I provided about civil rights progress. Others seemed impatient with examples from earlier decades of workplace transformation. Generational gap was evident even in classroom setting. Younger students wanted case studies from social media era rather than institutional change. Holiday season brought annual family gatherings I'd been dreading. Cousins asking about my retirement and whether I was enjoying taking it easy. Had to smile and deflect questions about my future plans. Pretended that leaving corporate world had been my choice rather than forced exile. Received LinkedIn message from former colleague asking for reference. She was applying for position similar to one I'd lost. Warned her about generational tensions and importance of managing younger employees carefully. Felt good to provide guidance based on hard-won experience. Year anniversary of termination passed with mix of reflection and determination. Had learned valuable lessons about workplace dynamics and generational change. Still believed deeply in importance of DEI work, but recognized need for different approaches. Maybe next opportunity would allow me to bridge divide between generations more effectively. Regional nonprofit organization posted opening for program director. Focused on workplace equity training for small businesses. Salary was fraction of corporate position, but mission aligned with my values. Prepared application highlighting adaptability and multi-generational communication skills. Interview went well because board members were closer to my age. They appreciated my corporate experience and systematic approach to change. Offered position with understanding that I'd need to work with diverse age groups. Felt hopeful about rebuilding career even if scale was smaller. New role required traveling throughout rural areas, providing training workshops. Different from downtown corporate environment, but meaningful work nonetheless. Local business owners were receptive to practical advice about avoiding discrimination lawsuits. Found satisfaction in helping small employers create more inclusive workplaces. Still living with sister, but saving money for own apartment. Nothing comparable to luxury downtown living, but independence was important. Looked at modest places within budget that would allow me to rebuild life. Priorities had shifted from status symbols to financial stability. Reconnected with few college friends who'd stayed in area. Coffee dates and book club meetings provided social connection I'd been missing. Different from sophisticated urban networking, but genuine friendships had value. 2. Learned to appreciate simpler pleasures that didn't require high income. Continued documenting my experience for potential memoir or academic paper. Story about DEI backlash deserved wider audience. Other women leaders needed to understand risks of generational conflict. Research about age discrimination in progressive organizations could prevent similar situations. Reflected often on lessons learned from corporate experience. Policies I'd created were sound, but implementation had been too rigid. Younger employees needed more voice in process rather than just benefiting from outcomes. Communication style had to adapt to changing workplace expectations. Didn't regret fighting for inclusive workplace practices. Every person who benefited from policies I'd established made struggle worthwhile. Problem was that good intentions weren't enough if delivery alienated key stakeholders. Future DEI work would require more collaborative approach. Systemic oppression took many forms, including age discrimination against women leaders. My experience proved that even progressive organizations could perpetuate inequality. Younger generations' impatience with incremental change had created new forms of exclusion. Ironic that pursuit of perfect equity had resulted in different type of injustice. Financial situation gradually improved through non-profit salary and careful budgeting. Would never return to luxury lifestyle, but stability was achievable. Learned to find fulfillment in meaningful work rather than status and prestige. Maybe losing everything had taught me what really mattered. Small town life offered unexpected benefits like community connection and slower pace. People here valued practical results over theoretical frameworks. Local businesses appreciated straightforward advice about employment law compliance. Different kind of impact than corporate transformation, but still valuable. Former colleagues occasionally reached out with updates about company changes. Apparently, new leadership had struggled to maintain momentum on DEI initiatives. Some progress had been reversed when younger employees left for other opportunities. Validated my belief that sustainable change required experienced guidance. Social media presence remained minimal after public humiliation during termination. Preferred private conversations with trusted contacts over public platform risks. Learned hard lesson about how quickly professional reputation could be destroyed. Future career moves would be more careful about digital footprint management. Continued believing that age discrimination was root cause of my professional downfall. Younger employees had used DEI language to mask generational prejudice. System I'd created to protect marginalized groups was weaponized against me. Real victims of workplace inequality included experienced women leaders like myself. 2 years after leaving corporate world, had found new equilibrium. Non-profit work provided purpose without previous stress and political complications. Small town life offered community support that anonymous city living had lacked. Financial security was modest, but sufficient for comfortable lifestyle. Still proud of achievements in corporate DEI leadership. Policies I'd established had created opportunities for hundreds of employees. Systematic approach to inclusion had influenced industry standards. Younger generations' impatience didn't diminish value of work. I'd accomplished. Future plans included expanding non-profits' reach to neighbouring counties, applying for grants to develop training programs for rural employers, potentially writing book about sustainable approaches to workplace equity, using experience to help other organizations avoid generational conflict, remained convinced that everything I'd done was based on sound principles. Commitment to equality and justice had guided every policy decision. If younger employees couldn't appreciate careful, systematic approach to change, that reflected their inexperience rather than flaws in my leadership. Age discrimination against women leaders was a serious problem that needed attention. My story was an example of how progressive organizations could perpetuate inequality. Systemic oppression worked in subtle ways that even well-intentioned people missed. Being victim of the system I'd tried to fix was ultimate irony.